The smell hit the rescue team before they even stepped inside. Rotting food, candle wax, incense, and the unmistakable stench of unwashed bodies all marinated together in a closed-up house that hadn't seen sunlight in months. There were bunk beds stacked 3 high, the windows were covered with aluminum foil, and on the wall, written in red marker, were the words, "The mothership is almost here. Don't be late." This wasn't the aftermath of a horror movie. It was a real house in San Diego, 1997. A house where 39 people calmly took their own lives after believing they were going to hitch a ride on a spaceship hiding behind a comet. And that was just one of the milder cult stories. The real thesis of this video? If you think royalty was unhinged, wait until you meet people who declared themselves messiahs, banned orgasms, claimed to speak for God through their teeth, or started entire religions around collecting pubic hair. You'll see what happens when absolute charisma meets zero accountability and too much free time. These people didn't need crowns, just a few dozen believers and a complete lack of shame. So buckle up, because we're diving into 7 of the most wildly unhinged cult leaders in history. These aren't just eccentric. They're so bizarre, you'll swear they were doing absurdist art, but no, they were serious. Tragically serious. Let's begin with one of the creepiest human memes in modern history, Marshall Applewhite. Heaven's Gate. Imagine your weird uncle who got really into ancient aliens and anime. Now imagine he thinks he's Jesus. Now give him 39 loyal followers and a savings account. That was Marshall Applewhite, the co-founder of Heaven's Gate. Applewhite started as a music teacher. Nothing strange there. But after suffering a nervous breakdown, losing his job, and possibly having a deeply repressed sexual identity crisis, he met Bonnie Nettles, a nurse and astrology enthusiast. Together they decided they were the two foretold by the Book of Revelation. Their message, Earth was about to be recycled, and the only escape was to evolve into a higher form by leaving behind their human vehicles. They told people a spaceship was coming. Yes, a literal spaceship, hiding behind a comet. They lived as ascetics. No sex, no alcohol, no identity. They shaved their heads, wore identical clothes, and referred to themselves with new names like Doe, T, and Neralodi, which sounds like a rejected Pokemon. Applewhite himself had undergone voluntary chemical castration, cause in his words, you can't evolve into a being of light if you're thinking with your downstairs brain. Their cult survived for over 2 decades, a slow-motion psychotic break held together by amateur web design and deeply sincere awkwardness. When the Hale-Bopp comet approached Earth in 1997, Applewhite told his followers the time had come. They rented a mansion, filmed goodbye videos and matching Nikes, and took barbiturates with vodka, believing they'd wake up aboard a spaceship. They didn't, but their website is still online. Seriously, heavensgate.com is live. You can email the surviving members who maintain it. Imagine being so deep in your own delusion that 26 years later, you're still answering customer service emails for a mass suicide. But at least Applewhite was calm. That's more than we can say for the next cult leader, who turned being a prophet into a body count. Shoko Asahara, Aum Shinrikyo. Shoko Asahara looked like the villain in a dystopian anime, which is weirdly appropriate considering he started a doomsday cult that mixed Buddhism, Christian apocalypse lore, and anime plot points. Born partially blind, Asahara failed to get into law school and turned to alternative medicine. And by alternative, I mean he claimed to float during meditation and had visions of nuclear war. By the 1990s, he declared himself the reincarnation of both Jesus Christ and Shiva the Destroyer. That's a hell of a combo. His cult Aum Shinrikyo began attracting thousands of highly educated Japanese citizens, including scientists and engineers, because nothing says trustworthy like a guy who stares into space and mutters about Armageddon. They wore uniforms, practiced extreme asceticism, worshipped Asahara as the literal living god, and then things got dark. He began preparing for what he called the final judgment. His solution? Speed it up. His followers started stockpiling chemical weapons, not metaphorical ones, real militarized sarin gas. On March 20th, 1995, Aum Shinrikyo members released sarin gas in the Tokyo subway system during rush hour, killing 13 people and injuring over 1,000, all in the name of forcing the apocalypse to begin. They wanted to cleanse the earth, and somehow the best first step was murdering commuters on their way to work. The kicker? After the attack, the cult still had hundreds of active members. Some still believe Asahara will return. It's the ultimate tragic irony. A guy too unhinged for anime, who couldn't pass his college entrance exam, ended up pulling off the only successful chemical attack by a religious cult in modern history. You think that's extreme? Let's scale back the body count but crank up the sheer surrealism, because our next cult leader started a religion by declaring himself pregnant with the Messiah. Father Divine, The International Peace Mission movement. Imagine a man so charismatic, so persuasive that in 1930s America, white folks called him father and voluntarily gave up all their belongings to follow him. And they weren't even on drugs. That's Father Divine, a man who claimed to be God, not a messenger, not chosen, literally God. His followers called him God in a body. When reporters asked about his past, he refused to answer. When asked if he'd ever die, he said, "How can God die?" He preached celibacy, racial integration, and personal purity. All positive, right? Except his sermons were delivered in manic, high-speed rants with word salads so chaotic they made Applewhite sound like a TED Talk. One famous line, "Peace is wonderful. It is and will be and was and shall have been." Father Divine banned sex, marriage, and even romantic hand-holding. For everyone except himself, of course. He married a much younger woman who he claimed was the reincarnation of his dead first wife. A woman, by the way, who he claimed never died, but simply changed vibrations. You know, like a radio station. Died? Nah, just switched frequencies. He created a utopian commune where everyone dressed in white, worked for free, and lived under his constant observation. Followers were taught to see him as their literal parent. He'd appear on stage with a halo of stage lights behind him, waving to adoring crowds who chanted his name like a pop concert. His death in 1965 was covered up for days. Why? Because the people around him were trying to figure out how to explain that God had just keeled over from old age. Turns out even omnipotence can't beat cholesterol. Still, his legacy lives on. His wife took over and claimed he had become invisible and was still present, because when your whole doctrine is I am God and can't die, and then you die, the only card left to play is ghost mode. Let's descend even deeper into the rabbit hole of deranged messiahs with a man who treated divine revelation like a live-action roleplay event in the woods, Jim Jones. The People's Temple. Now, you've probably heard of Jonestown, but what you may not realize is just how much of a theater kid turned doomsday dictator Jim Jones really was. Jones started his career as a charismatic preacher in Indiana, shouting about racial justice, socialism, and heaven on earth, which sounds great until you realize he also demanded total obedience, banned dissent, and claimed he had the power to heal cancer with his hands. Because nothing says revolutionary like pretending to pull tumors out of people's armpits. He called his congregation the People's Temple, but it may as well have been called the Church of Whatever I Say Goes. He'd stage fake miracles during services, hiring actors to pretend to be healed. His followers saw this as proof of his divinity. Jones called himself Father, said he was the reincarnation of Jesus, Lenin, and Buddha all at once, and began slipping from preacher into performance artist with a God complex. He'd record long, rambling sermons that sounded like a mix between motivational tapes and bad acid trips. In one, he shouted, "If I am not God, then why do you call me God? If I am not God, then why do the blind see and the lame walk?" They didn't, of course, but try telling that to someone who's handed over their home, their money, their family, and their autonomy. Paranoid that the US government was out to get him, which, to be fair, they kind of were. Jones moved his entire cult to the jungle of Guyana and built Jonestown, a socialist utopia that was actually a mosquito-infested labor camp run like a paranoid kindergarten. There were loudspeakers that blasted Jones's voice 24/7. Armed guards patrolled the grounds. People weren't allowed to leave. He banned sex unless it was with him. Yes, the 45-year-old preacher who wore sunglasses indoors and called himself Dad was also forcibly sleeping with everyone's spouses and calling it divine healing. And then came the rehearsals. He made his followers practice drinking flavored punch as a test of loyalty, calling it a white night, a dress rehearsal for mass suicide. Imagine doing murder-suicide table reads with your congregation. In 1978, after a visiting congressman investigated abuse allegations, Jones ordered the congressman and his entourage killed. Then, facing the consequences, he told his entire community, over 900 people, to drink cyanide-laced punch. And they did. Mothers gave it to their children first, then themselves. If they refused, armed guards made them. It was the largest loss of American civilian life in a non-natural disaster until 9/11. And here's the most haunting part. The final audio exists. You can listen to Jones giving his last sermon over screams, crying, and the sounds of death, telling them, don't be afraid to die. Death is just stepping over into another plane. Performance art? No. Cult madness taken to its most horrifying conclusion? Absolutely. But if you're thinking all cults have to end in death and Kool-Aid, allow me to introduce someone who built his following by selling laughing gas and magic underwear. George King, the Aetherius Society. We're taking a break from the doom and jumping into the bizarrely cheerful UFO cult that believes Jesus is an alien and yoga can prevent nuclear war. George King was a British taxi driver turned yogi turned intergalactic spokesperson for cosmic beings. In 1954, while doing the dishes in his London flat, he claimed he heard a voice say, "Prepare yourself, you are to become the voice of the interplanetary parliament." That's how it always starts, right? You're doing the dishes, and boom, Space Jesus wants you to be his prophet. King said he had been chosen by a cosmic intelligence named Aetherius from the planet Venus to save Earth from itself. This wasn't metaphorical. He literally believed Venus was inhabited by advanced beings who used UFOs to monitor us and send spiritual guidance via radio waves and vibrational harmonics. He founded the Aetherius Society, which blends flying saucer mythology, Buddhism, yoga, and early 50s sci-fi comic book energy. They hold rituals to send positive energy to stop natural disasters. They pray to the Lords of the Flame, use a device called the Spiritual Energy Battery, and believe mountains are holy because aliens landed on them once. King would go into trance states and channel messages from alien masters like Jesus, Buddha, and Master Sector 6. These sessions sound like someone doing a drunk Captain Kirk impression while reading fortune cookies. Members wear robes, chant incantations, and gather around giant boxes full of crystals and radio parts, while King, over a PA system, says things like, "This is the Master Aetherius, speaking from Interplanetary Craft number 4. Peace be with you, my children." He even claimed he'd created a cosmic shield to deflect nuclear warheads during the Cold War. Just King, some yoga, and an astral satellite blocking ICBMs with pure intention. He wasn't violent, thankfully, but this was essentially a long-running cosmic fanfiction with props. Today, the Aetherius Society still exists, has branches in multiple countries, and holds weekly prayers to stop climate change by sending spiritual light to tectonic faults. And honestly, compared to sarin gas and mass suicide, I'll take that. Let's now pivot to someone whose cult was built on more earthly desires, namely fame, control, and some of the most disturbing bedtime stories you've ever heard. Rosh Teriot, the Hill Kids. If you fused Charles Manson with a Canadian lumberjack and gave him a fetish for surgical tools, you'd get Rosh Teriot. Originally a Seventh-day Adventist preacher, Thériault started his own cult in rural Quebec in the late 1970s. He preached a doomsday message, warning of a nuclear apocalypse, and told his followers that only he could save them, as long as they gave up everything, moved to the forest, and let him have sex with whoever he wanted. They called themselves the Ant Hill Kids because he made them build cabins like ants building a hill. Cute name, not a cute cult. He enforced strict rules, no talking to each other without permission, no outside books, no doctors. He controlled every aspect of their lives. Their diets, their clothes, their names. He gave his wives new names and new chores. Oh yeah, wives, plural. He had over 20 children with multiple women in the cult, including girls he impregnated as teenagers. But here's where the line between delusion and sadism gets obliterated. Thériault claimed he had divine healing powers. If you got sick or hurt, he'd operate on you. No anesthesia, no training, just a kitchen knife, some pliers, and a total lack of empathy. He once cut off a follower's arm with a chainsaw. He performed forced circumcisions and pulled out teeth with no tools. When one woman complained of stomach pain, he sliced open her abdomen, removed parts of her intestines, and sewed her back up using a needle and thread from the kitchen. She died. His response? God's will. And yet, his followers stayed. They believed he was God's prophet. They believed the abuse was purification. Some of them said the pain was proof of his divine power. He was finally arrested in 1989 after one of his wives escaped and reported him. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he was eventually murdered by another inmate. Honestly, the least dramatic ending in the whole saga. The lesson? Even sadists can call themselves prophets, and desperate people will believe them, especially when they're isolated, broken down, and told that obedience equals salvation. Let's cool off the horror for a second and dip into something that's more puzzling. Less blood, more bewilderment, because our next cult leader believed that the apocalypse was coming, and the only thing that could save you was a really good outfit. Honohana Sampogyo, the foot reading cult. In the 1990s, a Japanese man named Fukunaga Hogan decided that regular medicine was a scam, religion wasn't doing its job, and feet Yes, feet were the true window to the soul. He called himself the Jesus Christ of the Heisei era, modest, and his divine skill, foot diagnosis. He claimed he could tell everything about your life by examining your souls, your health, your future, your past sins, all hiding in your bunions and heel cracks. He even wrote a sacred book filled with illustrations of diseased feet and what each toe meant. Hogan opened clinics, gave seminars, and began recruiting followers who believed his gospel of podiatric prophecy, but he didn't do this for free. A single diagnostic session cost over $900, and if he told you your foot had cancer vibrations or divorce energy, he'd offer to sell you a healing scroll or crystal for a few thousand more. His followers believed he could cure terminal illness with foot massages, rearrange karma, and communicate with the spirits of ancestors who presumably also had jacked up toes. At his peak, he had tens of thousands of followers, hundreds of staff, and made over $60 million. He even staged dramatic graduation ceremonies where people wore ornate robes and fake crowns, posed in front of elaborate altars, and thanked Fukunaga for saving them from spiritual foot doom. They clapped, they wept, they bowed to the guy who touched their heels and told them their chakra was clogged. Eventually, Japanese authorities got suspicious. They raided his headquarters and discovered massive financial fraud. The real kicker? When asked if he believed he was truly divine, Fukunaga said, "I don't need to believe. I know. My feet told me." He was arrested and sentenced to 12 years in prison, but he still has loyal followers who believe he'll return. On what? Probably orthopedic sandals. Now that you've heard of the foot-reading messiah, how about we swing wildly back to full-tilt psychosis? Let's talk about a man who claimed God spoke directly through his teeth and who kidnapped children to build his version of paradise. Dwight York, the Nuwaubian Nation. This one's hard to even describe without sounding like you're making it up as you go. Dwight York started as a black Muslim preacher in the 1970s, preaching a version of Nation of Islam doctrine until he decided that wasn't spicy enough. Over the next 2 decades, York rebranded himself more times than a failing tech startup. He went from Islamic preacher to Egyptian mystic to alien ambassador to ancient Sumerian king, sometimes all in the same speech. Eventually, he created the Nuwaubian Nation, a spiritual science cult that combined UFOs, conspiracy theories, black nationalism, Freemasonry, and Willy Wonka aesthetic. And I'm not kidding about that last part. York bought a 476-acre plot of land in rural Georgia and built a literal Egyptian-themed compound called Tamari. It had pyramids, giant statues of pharaohs, obelisks, and guards in gold robes and sunglasses. It looked like a Las Vegas hotel designed by a toddler who just watched Stargate. His teachings were an incomprehensible soup of alien mythology and fake history. He claimed that the planet Earth was ruled by reptilian shapeshifters from another dimension, that white people were lab experiments gone wrong, and that he himself was a being from the planet Risk, here to enlighten humanity through vibrational linguistics. But here's the twist. York wasn't just weird, he was deeply dangerous. He used his cult to exploit and abuse children, dozens of them. He told followers their kids needed to be purified. The compound was locked, guarded, and completely under his control. Families were brainwashed into silence. In 2002, federal agents raided Tamaray. What they found was a horror show. York was arrested and charged with over 100 counts of child abuse. He's now serving a 135-year sentence in federal prison. The compound? Bulldozed, erased, but the sheer surrealism of it, Egyptian alien bunkers in Georgia, still baffles everyone who witnessed it. This was a cult that looked like a low-budget sci-fi movie, sounded like a Reddit conspiracy subreddit, and turned out to be a front for one of the largest child abuse operations in US history. And if you're wondering how people believed all this, just remember, he didn't start as an alien god. He started as a preacher, built trust, and escalated slowly. That's the trick. No one joins a death cult. They join a community and get the crazy spoon-fed one vibration at a time. Ready for a palate cleanser? Let's go back in time, way back, and meet a cult leader who was so charming he convinced 8,000 people to join his movement, Mikkel, with only one main belief: the world is already perfect. Oh, and also, no one should bathe, ever. Father Yod, the Source family, the 1970s, a magical time of free love, acid, and homemade theology. Father Yod, born James Baker, was a white guy from Cincinnati who did what all spiritual bros do when they hit middle age. He moved to LA, opened a vegan restaurant, and declared himself God. He started the Source family, a commune made up of beautiful, mostly young people with names like Sunflower, Electricity, Isis Aquarian, and Octavius. They all lived in a big mansion, wore white robes, meditated a lot, and played in a psychedelic rock band called Yahowah 13. Yes, that's the real name. Baker changed his name to Father Yod and declared himself a cosmic patriarch who could speak for the universe. His doctrine was a mix of Eastern philosophy, sci-fi mysticism, and casual polygamy. He had 14 wives, all cult members, and claimed that sexual energy was the key to spiritual ascension. He banned bathing, wearing shoes, and processed food, which meant the Source Mansion smelled like patchouli, quinoa, and unbrushed teeth at all times. Their band would record 15-hour jam sessions in a single day, convinced their music was opening portals. Here's the thing, they weren't even violent. They were too weird to be scary. They opened LA's first organic vegan restaurant, The Source, which became popular with celebrities like John Lennon, Marlon Brando, and health nuts who had no idea their chef thought he was Zeus. Father Yod eventually decided he'd transcended the need for earthly vehicles and tried to hang glide off a Hawaiian cliff. He had never hang glided before. You can guess how that ended. Spoiler, not well. He died from his injuries. The Source family disbanded shortly after, but many of them still say it was the best time of their lives. And honestly, if you're going to join a cult, might as well be one where the worst thing that happens is bad breath and too many tambourines. One more? Alright, you've earned it. Let's finish this section with a man who banned calendars, renamed everyone after vegetables, and declared that robots were watching us from the moon. Brother 12, the Aquarian Foundation. In the 1920s, a British naval officer turned mystic named Edward Arthur Wilson founded a utopian commune on Vancouver Island. He renamed himself Brother 12 and claimed to be the 12th messenger of the cosmic hierarchy sent to usher in the age of Aquarius. His followers believed he had divine wisdom, magic powers, and the ability to speak with interdimensional entities. He promised a new world order free from capitalism, sin, and, bizarrely, vibrational parasites. He made followers give up their possessions, live on a remote compound, and grow their own food. He renamed them after plants and celestial bodies. He built golden thrones for himself and his lover, whom he claimed was a reincarnated Egyptian goddess. Things went off the rails when he announced that dark machines from the moon were monitoring their progress, and only he could protect the group with psychic shields. Then he started punishing dissenters by making them dig giant holes in the forest, not to bury anything, just as karmic realignment. When the government started investigating him for fraud, Brother 12 burned down the compound, fled with the gold, and vanished. Some say he died in Europe. Others say he faked his death and lived on as an interdimensional traveler. All we know for sure is this. At some point in Canada's quiet forests, a man convinced dozens of people to leave everything behind because robots from the moon were watching us through vibrations. By now you might be thinking, okay, that's enough cult madness for one day. But we haven't reached peak absurdity yet, because our next cult leader didn't just claim to be the second coming. He claimed to be the reincarnation of Jesus, Buddha, and Elvis simultaneously. Jose Luis de Jesus Miranda, the man who was literally everything. This man had range. Born in Puerto Rico, Jose Luis de Jesus Miranda started as a charismatic preacher who looked like he was auditioning for a Miami Vice reboot. But at some point in the late 90s, he decided that being a pastor wasn't enough. He was, in his own words, God in the flesh. At first, he just told people he was the reincarnation of St. Paul. Then it escalated quickly. Soon he was Jesus Christ, but updated. The 2.0 version. His church, Creciendo en Gracia, or Growing in Grace, began attracting thousands of followers across Latin America and the US. Then things got extra spicy. He announced he was also the Antichrist, not in the usual doom-laden bring on the fire and brimstone way. No, he said the term Antichrist had been misunderstood. According to him, it just meant the one who came to abolish religious laws. He even got a 6666 tattooed on his forearm, along with thousands of his followers. Yes, literal 6666 tattoos, like a club membership to the world's most confusing theology. Jose preached that sin didn't exist, Satan wasn't real, and salvation was automatic because he had declared it so. That's it. Boom. You're saved. You're welcome. He would walk into churches and demand they remove crosses because he said the crucifix was a symbol of defeat. He told his followers to drink, smoke, party, and live however they wanted. He bought luxury cars, designer suits, and lived in a mansion because, after all, why wouldn't God want a solid Rolex collection? He had his own private security detail, gave himself honorary doctorates, and was surrounded by bishops and apostles who called him Daddy. His sermons were less like church services and more like religious TED Talks from an alternate dimension. By the mid-2000s, his movement had over 100 churches worldwide. He even declared that the apocalypse had already happened. Spiritually, of course, and that he was the ruler of the new earth. In 2013, he died of cirrhosis. Because even being God doesn't protect you from liver damage. His followers were shocked. They had expected him to ascend, not decay. Some believed he faked his death. Others said he simply shed his physical shell and became fully divine. Others just quietly removed the tattoos and never brought it up again. And while his name faded, his legacy lives on as one of the most audacious cases of spiritual identity theft in modern times. Jesus, Buddha, Elvis, all rolled into one tanned man in a Gucci belt. But let's not end on a global movement. Let's zoom in on a small town preacher with big dreams and even bigger delusions. Tony Alamo, denim, child brides, and biblical copyright claims. Tony Alamo was like a televangelist villain written by the Coen brothers. Born Bernie Lazar Hoffman, he changed his name to Tony Alamo to sound more Italian and spiritually impressive. In the 1960s, he and his wife Susan began preaching on the streets of Los Angeles. Soon they had a loyal following, a growing empire, and a clothing line. Yes, a clothing line. Alamo's cult manufactured bedazzled, rhinestone-encrusted denim jackets worn by celebrities like Mr. T and even Elvis Presley. If there was one thing Tony Alamo knew, it was that the Lord loved sequins. But while the jackets were flashy, the doctrine got darker. He taught that the government was run by the Illuminati, that the Catholic Church was the great whore of Babylon, that all diseases, including cancer and AIDS, were caused by sin and could be cured by prayer. His sermons were broadcast by shortwave radio across the country, full of fire, brimstone, and deeply paranoid rants that made Alex Jones sound restrained. Behind the scenes, Tony built a compound in Arkansas where followers lived in communal housing, worked for free, and were subjected to endless rules. He claimed marriages were chosen by divine revelation, which in practice meant he decided who could marry whom, including himself. After Susan died, Tony claimed her spirit still guided him. Then he started marrying girls, very young girls. He called it spiritual union. The state called it a felony. His child brides ranged in age from 9 to 15. He claimed it was biblical. The courts disagreed. In 2009, he was convicted on 10 counts of child sexual abuse and sentenced to 175 years in prison. He died in 2017, unmourned, unrepentant, and definitely not ascending anywhere. The Alamo jackets, though, still floating around on eBay, a sparkling reminder that you can wear rhinestones and still be a monster. Now let's do one final loop-de-loop through cult land, because some of the most deranged cults don't come with robes or rituals, just a charismatic face and a camera. Teal Swan, YouTube's cult of personality, meet the influencer messiah. Teal Swan is a new age spiritual teacher with piercing eyes, flowing hair, and a background so shady it makes haunted forests look well lit. She preaches healing, consciousness, shadow work, and self-love, all wrapped in the aesthetic of an Instagram goddess doing trauma therapy in a canyon. Her content looks like it came from a wellness spa retreat. The messaging, not so gentle. She openly discusses suicide, often in ways that critics say glamorize it. She claims she can see people's past lives, childhood trauma, and energy fields. Her followers believe she is a fractal of God who has returned to Earth to help humanity awaken. She's been accused of exploiting vulnerable people with mental health struggles, isolating them from friends and family, and encouraging them to view suicide as a reset. In a 2022 documentary, The Deep End, her inner circle was shown operating more like a manipulative inner court, one where loyalty meant total surrender. Teal denies being a cult leader, but she holds retreats where participants are told to question their reality, cut ties with doubters, and submit to her teachings completely. Sound familiar? She has disciples who've tattooed her symbols on their bodies. Some claim she cured their lifelong depression. Others left her community saying they were gaslit, guilt-tripped, and pushed deeper into despair. What makes her uniquely dangerous is that she isn't living in a jungle or on a remote compound. She's on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. Her cult is platformed. Her sermons are algorithms. Her altar is the front-facing camera. It's not robes and Kool-Aid anymore. It's healing crystals, wellness jargon, and like and subscribe for enlightenment. So what's the takeaway from all of this? Cults don't come from outer space. They come from ordinary people. People with charisma, delusions, or just a hunger for power, and they don't always look like evil villains. Sometimes they look like therapists, or musicians, or your neighbor who says energy a little too much. The weirdest part? Most cult leaders didn't start by planning a cult. They started small. A sermon, a blog post, a yoga class. Then the followers came, the flattery came, the money came, and when no one said stop, the madness grew. The only thing more dangerous than a madman is a madman who's convinced he's saving the world. So what can we actually learn from this grand parade of delusion? Let's take a moment to line them up again. Marshall Applewhite wore matching tracksuits and convinced people a spaceship was coming to rescue their souls. Shoko Asahara tried to speed up the apocalypse with subway gas attacks. Roche Theriault played backwoods Dr. Frankenstein with pliers and a god complex. Jose Luis de Jesus Miranda declared himself Jesus, the Antichrist, and Elvis in the same sermon while rocking a Rolex and drinking rum. And then you've got the quieter cults, the ones selling spiritual light, emotional healing, or foot massages of salvation. They all had different scripts, different aesthetics. Some chose purple robes and temples. Some chose YouTube thumbnails and tarot decks. Some were violent monsters. Others were just deeply weird, but they all had one thing in common. They created a reality and refused to let anyone else edit it. That's the real power of a cult. Not just the control over your actions, it's control over the story. These leaders didn't need facts. They just needed followers who wanted to believe. And once that belief took root, they could say literally anything. That's why it doesn't matter how bizarre the claim is. Moon robots, talking horses, divine flatulence. If you isolate people just enough, wear the right outfit, and speak with enough fake certainty, someone will say, sounds legit. And let's be honest, sometimes from the outside it's funny. A man claiming aliens speak through his fillings? Hilarious. A YouTube guru telling people to channel their trauma through crystal jars? Ridiculous. Until someone drinks the punch, or signs over their house, or hands their child to a man claiming God wants to purify them. Because here's the dark truth. Cults don't recruit weirdos. They recruit everyone. The lonely, the curious, the spiritual, the ones in pain, the ones looking for meaning, for healing, for order in a chaotic world. And that's why cults keep happening, because reality is chaotic, and we're wired to find patterns, certainty, a voice that says, I know the way. What cult leaders offer is comfort. At first, that's the bait. They say, you're not alone. There's a higher purpose. I understand your pain. And then they say, but only I can fix it. That's when the trap closes. So how do we fight that? We ask questions, we check sources, we trust people who admit they don't have all the answers. We get suspicious of anyone who claims to be the only truth teller in a world full of lies. And we learn to tell the difference between a teacher and a tyrant with a candle and a charisma complex. But okay, enough with the sermon. Let's end on the absurd. Let's put this whole unhinged mess in perspective. Because while the consequences of cults are serious, sometimes the details are so absurd, so surreal, they feel like rejected sketches from Saturday Night Live. Just think about it. A man built an Egyptian temple in Georgia and claimed to be an alien king from planet Risk. Another man held dinner parties for ghosts in a fake cave while wearing swan costumes. One declared that he could block nuclear bombs with yoga. Another made people tattoo 666 on themselves to prove how not evil he was. We had one leader who died laughing at a bad joke. Another who tried to hang glide into the heavens and face planted into a lava rock. One spent his life chasing an immortality elixir and ended up embalmed in his own mercury. And let's not forget Henry VIII, so bloated and foul that dogs literally licked up his remains after his corpse exploded. If the afterlife has a lounge, these lunatics are definitely seated at the same table, arguing over who had the worst plan. Marshall Applewhite, I got people to shave their heads for a comet spaceship. Jim Jones, cute. I convinced 900 people to drink poison in the jungle. Father Yod, bro, I died on a hang glider wearing a toga and a headband. Brother 12, hold my moon crystal. And somewhere, Caligula is trying to get them all to vote his horse into the HOA. But here's the real kicker. Despite all the red flags, there are still people today falling into brand new cults. Only now the robes are gone. The compound is digital. The leader might be live streaming in yoga pants, holding a crystal wand, and selling $300 trauma healing guides. Because the performance art never stopped. It just changed costumes. You might scroll past it on Instagram. You might hear it in a podcast. You might even hear it from a friend who starts talking about vibrational alignment and harvesting DNA upgrades through quantum light. It all sounds woo-woo and harmless until you're 3 seminars deep, your bank account's empty, and you're mailing hair samples to a woman named Earth Mother who claims to be the reincarnated spirit of Atlantis. The bottom line, if someone claims they're the only one who can save you, run. If they say the truth is too dangerous to tell anyone else, run faster. And if their doctrine includes matching jumpsuits, giving up your name, or drinking anything labeled as cleansing nectar of rebirth, just start sprinting, because what starts as quirky often ends as culty. What starts as alignment can become allegiance, and what starts as performance sometimes doesn't end until it's too late. So next time someone offers you truth, salvation, or cosmic wisdom, ask them this: do I get to keep my name? Do I get to laugh at your bad ideas? Do I get to leave if it gets weird? Because if the answer to any of those is no, you're not in a community. You're in a costume party with consequences. Thanks for watching. If you like this deep dive into madness and messiahs, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, which cult was the most bizarre to you? Which one would make the best Netflix series? And which one would you accidentally join just for the robes? Subscribe for more history, horror, and unhinged humanity. And remember, if a guy in sunglasses says he's God, Elvis, and Buddha in one, he's not enlightened. He's just having a weird Tuesday.